very survival, yet the first DNC debate was set up so that climate barely got mentioned. Climate is Iowa caucus goers' #1 concern, and most Democratic candidates have called on the DNC to hold a climate debate. But the DNC refuses and says that any candidate who participates in a non-DNC sanctioned debate will be excluded from other Democratic Party debates. That is just wrong. The DNC has a cozy relationship with fossil fuel money and is gambling with our future. We are tired of politics as usual. We want candidates who are committed to making the climate crisis their top urgent priority. We want candidates brave enough to stand up against the DNC. We hope the DNC will change its mind and host its climate debate, but we are not holding our breath. To fill the void, Bold Iowa has announced its plan to host a climate debate this fall, and we invite other entities to co-host it with us. If enough candidates agree to participate, the DNC will have to back down. So my question for you is, will you commit to participating in Bold Iowa's climate debate?
Yes. I mean, I think you know, I don't see why we can't have a couple of issue-specific debates. I would have a climate debate, I'd have a healthcare debate. Right? I mean, you know, healthcare, it's almost a silly argument what's the most important issue. I know, because I've been to all 99 counties and campaigning, there's a couple of issues that everyone always asks about. Healthcare, climate, maybe one or two others. I don't see any reason why we wouldn't have debates on these things. I mean, I find it incredibly frustrating how these debates were conducted. To me, I mean, why wouldn't they have picked the 5 big issues? And you could come up with a list. 5 big issues. And gone around and give every candidate 60 seconds on each issue. Just to level set the field. Wouldn't that have been useful to you? Yeah. To see where every one of these candidates stood on maybe 5 issues, and then we can argue, you know, scream yell at each other. But at least let the voters know where people stand on these issues. And on climate, it's really important because I think there's 2 questions people have to ask on climate. The first question, putting aside do you think it's a problem, the presumption is that all the Democrats running for president think it's a big problem, because we all do. So you almost don't have to ask them. The first question is, okay, what is your plan? Tell me, as president, what you're going to do. And the second question is, tell me how you're going to make it happen. Because climate is a very unique issue. It's an issue that we're going to run out of time on. So like infrastructure is a huge problem in this country. I talk about it all the time. And if we don't build infrastructure in the next 5 years, it's a missed opportunity. And it'll hurt our citizens. But it doesn't get, the problem doesn't get exponentially worse. But on climate, it does. So what's actually important is what you're planning and how you're going to get it done. And I think that's where the debate is. Because what the American people don't need is hollow talking points on climate. They don't need people kind of giving beautiful speeches and getting emotional about, you know, the sea rising in Florida. We all know this is happening. We all know it poses an existential risk to our prosperity and national security, in addition to our environmental stewardship. And what we need is action, which is why so much of my climate plan is focused on action. Things that I will do and how I'll get them done. So like I introduced the only bipartisan carbon pricing mechanism in the Congress. I have Democrats and Republicans vote on a carbon fee. Bipartisan. What made it bipartisan is that I take all the money that's generated from this carbon fee, $3 trillion over 10 years, because you put a tax on fossil fuel production. And the federal government collects $3 trillion of tax revenues. This tax causes energy prices that are tied to fossil fuels to go up and makes people use them less. And it makes renewables more competitive. That's how these things work. It's been modeled to cut emissions by 90%. But what I do is I take the money and I give it back to the American people in a dividend. So it's a carbon fee dividend approach. And I believe I can pass that in my first year as president. And the coalition that I'm going to create to pass that bill will be every single Democrat in the Congress and the Republicans who live in coastal states. Because while I would love for Senator Ernst and Grassley to vote for this bill, I'm not holding my breath. But I can tell you that Marco Rubio would vote for it. because he represents the state of Florida. And a majority of Republicans in the state of Florida want the federal government to deal with climate. Every Democrat does. Huge majorities of independents, but actually a majority of Republicans. And so you have to have a strategy to how you're going to get something done. But that's not the only thing we're going to do. We're going to do a lot more, and my climate plan's got a lot of aspects to it. But I would like a debate on, okay, what are you going to do? Why is it going to work? And how are you going to get it done? Because if we're having a debate for the 2020 presidential election, and we haven't done anything on climate, it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. So one of the reasons I'm in favor of debate is because I think a debate could force the conversation around how you're going to make it happen. One of the things I call for that's unique to my plan is I want to launch a whole new industry in this country called direct air capture. These are machines that currently exist. Think of them like vacuums, CO2 vacuums. They actually remove CO2 from the atmosphere. It's not science fiction. The problem with these machines is they're really expensive. But that's exactly what we would have said about wind and solar 30 years ago. We would have said, you know, this wind and solar stuff works, but it's really expensive. So what did we do? We created a market for it through tax incentives. And what do you see when you drive around Iowa? You see big wind turbines. And you see a pretty good migration of the electricity production in this country towards renewables. We can do the same thing with negative emissions. I want to take all of the tax credits we give fossil fuel companies. You know, we as the taxpayers give fossil fuel companies $50 billion in tax credit. Think about that. I want to take all that money and use it to create a market for negative emissions technologies. Because we're not going to get to net zero by 2050. Because that's what we have to be at. We have to be net zero by 2050. We won't do it unless we remove 20% of the carbon from the atmosphere. It's just the truth. And we can do it. And we'll also save the world. And by the way, this creates 300,000 jobs. And I'm proposing to be located in the heartland of the United States of America. A lot of union jobs. You know, because like New York and Washington, D.C., and Boston, and San Francisco, they don't need these jobs. But you know who needs them? The center of the country. We can build a whole industry removing CO2 from the atmosphere. Just these are the kind of things, and that's something you can get people to support. Because then you're not solving climate change on the back of workers. You're actually creating jobs when you're doing it.